TV4, the Community Television Network.
Hello, my name is Michael Connolly. I teach a course in modern Irish history and literature at the University of Southern Maine. My interest in Irish studies evolves from my being born on Munjoy Hill in the eastern part of Portland in what was an Irish and Italian community. I proceeded to study for several years in Ireland and received my master's degree in modern Irish history, and have only recently completed my doctoral dissertation on the Irish longshoremen of Portland, Maine. The Irish are one of Maine's and Portland's oldest and largest ethnic communities. Early in the 18th century, Irish from the northeastern part of Ireland in Ulster, Scotch-Irish Presbyterians, arrived in Pojepska, which is now called Brunswick. By the mid-19th century, when Ireland was going through the horrendous potato famine, thousands were arriving all along the east coast. In the mid-1880s, another wave of Irish, this time largely from the western part of Ireland around County Galway, arrived both in Portland and along the east coast as well. By the 1920s, immigration restriction limited the number of Irish and other European immigrants into this country. That was approximately 70 years ago. The last wave of Irish immigrants, who were in their teens or early 20s then, are now in their mid-80s or early 90s. They are the last survivors of this great wave of Irish immigrant into America. Steve Concannon of Portland is a fine representative of this group. Steve lives in Grant Street in Portland and is the father of Kevin Concannon, the former Commissioner of Mental Health in Maine, Father Steve Concannon of Scarborough, Gerard of Portland, Vincent of Boston, and Mary Ann of Connecticut. Steve has 24 grandchildren and 15 great-grandchildren. Steve Concannon was born on December 22nd, 1900, in Derryloughlin East, in the Irish-speaking Gaeltacht region of County Galway. In an hour-long interview with Steve early in 1988, we talked about several significant moments in his life on both sides of the Atlantic. These included memories of his early trips to market in Galway with his parents aboard a donkey cart around the year 1912, his education in Ireland, the role of the Irish language in his life, both in Ireland and in Portland, memories of what are called Ireland's revolutionary period between the Easter Rising of 1916 and the conclusion of the war with Great Britain in 1923. His leaving of Ireland and his early arrival in America, his work in Portland, both as a building laborer and as a longshoreman along Portland's waterfront. And finally, his philosophy of life, in which, in Steve's own words, the secret of life is your happiness. So now enjoy with me these memories of an Irish immigrant, Stephen Concannon.
I was born in Derryloughlin in this parish of Spiddle. That's about 7 miles west of Galway, and the city of Galway, you know, maybe a little over 7 miles, maybe. And I was born there. I was born on the 22nd of December, 1900, and then I was baptized the next day, I guess.
So you were born in 1900?
Yeah, 1900.
How long did you live there in Ireland, in Galway?
I lived there. I lived in Galway in my own village until October 1919. October 1919, I whisked over to East Galway. I worked for a farmer there. I worked a year and a half there until March of 1921. So I left there at that time. I came to America in April 1921. But I worked about a year and a half in East Galway. I learned how to do ploughing, whereas in the western part of the Galway, where I came from, the land was rocky and stony, as you could see yourself as you saw it. You couldn't do any ploughing there, but in East Galway we did, we did a lot of, you could plough. The land was good there. And so I learned how to plough and harrow and, and I enjoyed it over there. I was young, and we used to go to dances every Sunday night. It was more lively than my own village. And we used to maybe sometimes, we didn't think nothing of going to a couple of miles or 3 miles to a dance Sunday night, Yeah.
My grandmother is also from the west of Galway, and she says, when you buy meat, you buy bone, and when you buy land, you buy stone. Did you ever hear that one before?
No.
Would you agree with that?
No, no, the land, the sheep in East Galway there, they call it mutton. And if you go to a butcher shop over there, you'd almost feel that it was beef, because the sheep are quite big there, in East Galway. But in the western part of Galway, the lamb, they are smaller sheep because they are mountain sheep, they grow on a mountain, and they make a living on a mountain. So in the west of Galway, the sheep, I would say, is small, but on the east of Galway and all that area up through Dublin again, County Meath, the sheep is quite big, because you'd get about 6 pounds of wool on one of the sheep over in East Galway, whereas in the western part, I would say probably that'd be 3 pounds, maybe 3 pounds.
That's quite a difference.
Yeah.
It's quite a bit more difficult to be a farmer than where you came from, in the west of
Yes,
Galway.
I would say to be a prosperous farmer, yes, it was almost impossible because the land was poor and there was no tillage. One of the means of income we had is the fact that my father had, and around that area, they had a horse and cart, and they used to cart turf to the city of Galway twice a week. I mean, my father used to go for the load of turf on every Wednesday, and then my mother would go with them on a smaller, they used to half a loaf on a Saturday, and she would bring eggs and butter or whatever she had. What I would say in that case, we had the necessities of life with no luxuries.
How did your mother and father get from Derrylochan to Galway when they brought in the turf and the...
Oh, they on the horse, well, on a Saturday, it was a small load on a cart, and my mother would sit up there with my father, and she'd have a basket where she'd have the eggs and the butter and like that, and that's how they'd go to Galway,
Would there be many people doing the same thing?
Oh yes, many. And of course, now with the modernization over there, with the automobiles, the horses, it's dangerous to have a horse on the road there.
Yes.
So they don't seem to have any horse. There is no horse going to Galway anymore.
Did you ever take the trip to Galway in the morning with your parents?
I did. I think it's 1912, the first year I went there. My mother brought me there to buy me shoes for the winter. We had no shoes in the summertime over there, but in the wintertime we'd have them on going to school. So,
what year was that?
That was about 1912, I would say.
1912.
Probably. Yeah.
What do you remember about that trip?
Well, I know we were brought up in the country place, and I remember a tram man. They used to have trams in Galway at that time, running on a track with 2 horses. And this fellow was driving the tram. He saw me looking down on my new shoes, and he knew I was a country boy. He hollered to me. He had some joke about me, about my. But I would say that today, with the modernization in Ireland, is completely changed from my time. The roads are way better, you know, the blacktop roads. There was no such a thing as a blacktop road.
What was the road like from Derrylaughon and Spittle into Galway back then?
Oh, well, you know, it was really rough and narrow. For example, there was only room enough for 2 cars to pass each other, you know, 2 horses, you know.
Yes.
But they widened the road since that time. It's a completely changed road. And they took a lot of the curves out and they filled up some of the valleys, you know. So it is quite a revolution from my day. And, you know, the people, of course, a young generation over there today from the Irish government got them. The Irish government have done a lot, you know, for example, in getting free transportation to bring the young boys or students to school. They came from back areas, like back around Carrow now, they come to Spittle in my parish, where the Sisters of Mercy used to teach, you know, and it's equivalent to a secondary school. Then they got tech schools, whereas in my time, there was no tech school there. You'd have to pay if you went for a trade, to learn any trade, you would have to pay for that. Whereas now the government has been teaching them for a long time, you know, the trades, you know, I mean, carpentry, plumbing, and decorations, so forth. So, I mean, they have more opportunities, the young generation, and as a result, of course, the standard of education came up a lot in Ireland in comparison to my time.
Right.
Whereas in our day, it's not us brought up in the country, it's very few, I would say, that it's only a minority of them that reached the 8th grade in school.
How about yourself, Steve?
I only went as far as the 5th grade.
Really?
Yeah.
What's your memory of school in Ireland?
You know, I mean, you know, well, it was handicapped. For example, in the school that I went to, is the school teacher and his wife, and they had 100 and maybe I used to mark it on the blackboard, sometimes 120 kids. Well, when you figure out on 7 grades, it was hard for them to give them any individual care, you know what I mean. That was one of the drawbacks.
Yes.
Whereas today, you know, they have teachers for every class, as far as I understand it. You know, the method and way of education is a way superior to my time, you know.
What subjects would you have studied in school back then?
Well, it's reading, you know, it was both in reading in Gaelic, Irish, and in English, and the map and little history we used to have, you know, every Friday we used to have a half an hour history and sums and additions, subtractions. But I say we learned only, I would call it, the basics of education, you know. You learn how to read, so it's really, I learned more out reading books out here than I did over there.
Ah, yes. What language was the school taught?
In my time, it was the Irish language, whereas today, of course, today the radio and television, all the news, and it's always English. So the young little tots today, they pick up the English language, and the Irish language is diminishing there very much so, because the young generation going to school seems so that they prefer to speak the English rather than the Irish, you know.
When you were growing up around Spittle, did most people speak English or Irish?
Oh, everyone spoke the Irish, because in fact, many of them couldn't speak English, you know. Many of them, you know, especially way, you know, back in Carrow there, because it was all predominantly Irish. And but it's the situation, the change that came. The television and the radio has contributed, you know, to them picking up the English. So the little tots over there, if you notice yourself, you can ask them any question, they will answer you in English, and they speak the Gaelic. But even those of them, like my own grandniece, who was out here, you know, Morafini there, she can write Irish and English and teach it, I think, but still I could see that she always preferred to speak the English language. And the same way with my other one that got married here last August. She can speak and write the Irish, but it is she always speaks the English, because on the eastern part of Galway, from that area, all they speak is English. And when she works in a place in Galway for the computer company, where they can meet computers. Well, they all speak English, so the result is they at last they end up by preferring to speak the
Yes.
English rather.
What about the Radio na Gaeltachta? Did you listen to that much when you were there?
No, not much, Michael. No, I didn't. You know, there's a place in Furba there, you know, for synopsis, if you notice it.
Yes.
Yes, in Galway, but no, I didn't. But I would say that that the Irish government, for example, spent millions of pounds on to promote the Irish. And in many cases, you know, for example, it was compulsory for the school teacher to be able to teach the Gaelic.
Right.
But somehow or the other, I do not know, it's a hard language to learn. And over there, I was over there a few years ago, and during the summer months where they're studying Irish at the Spittle there, and I met this young fella, you know, from the southern part of Ireland. I think he was from County Cork, and about 18 years old, young fella, and I asked him which was the easier for him to learn, French, the French language, or the Irish language, and he said it was easier for him to learn the French than the Irish.
Yes.
Well, that is one of the reasons that is so hard to promote the Gaelic language. It's a very hard language to learn, you know.
Right.
I mean, we were brought up with it, you know, I would say on a peasantry level, of course. I mean, we didn't learn the Gaelic language on the education level, on farmers, you know what I mean.
When did you first start to speak English, Steve?
Well, I did, you know, when I went to East Galway in October 1919, all that area, that's all they spoke is English. So I had no difficulty speaking English when I came to this country, because for a year and a half, that's about all I spoke over there is English, you know.
But if you hadn't gone to work in East Galway?
I would, because I'd be able probably to get by, you know. I mean, I would understand what people would say to me, you know, because in school it was half English and half Irish, you know what I mean. We had to learn the English too, you know.
Mm-hmm.
That was compulsory from the British government that time. The inspector, for example, was British, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Ireland was part of the Great Britain back
yes,
then.
oh yes, until 1922. I was about 2 years out here when the treaty was signed, you know.
Right.
When they got the Free State in 1922.
Right.
And I left in April 1921, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Steve, how did you find out about the work in East Galway?
well, you know, they used to have, for example, the same way, but on a much smaller scale as people let's out in Rooster County here in the fall of the year during, you know, potato digging. They had people from Canada pick up potatoes. Well, it was over there the same way, but I say on a much smaller scale. And they used to go to East Galway, you know, with a spade to dig potatoes, you know. And I went over there, and I only intended to stay for a month. And but when I got there, I settled down. I liked the place, and it was a great crowd. Yeah, I was in with the young fellas, and we used to, as I said, we used to go to dances. I worked, you know, the 7 days a week. I used to have to milk the cows on a Sunday, and bring the 2 horses to the pond and so forth. But still, you know, I like the change, and I say I was learning English over there too, you know.
One time, as I remember, Steve, you were having a conversation with a man out in the field, and you weren't paying too much attention to what he was saying. Do you remember that story?
Probably you mean Big Matt Curran we used to have, you know. Well, that was in my own village. We used to, you know, put out the turf. Them days, of course, they have tractors now to go in on the bog, but them days you'd have to go in on the bog with a donkey and the 2 baskets and bring it out, you know, where the horse and cart would get it. And this day I had my donkey and the baskets, you know, putting out turf and start thundering. And I used to decided, I tied up my ass, and I went down to listen with this Matt Curran. He was in England, and he never could read or write, but he had a tremendous memory, and I used to love to listen with him telling me about England, you know. And so I was asking him questions, and he was talking so fast, he knew that I wasn't catching on. And he waited a minute and he asked me something question, and I was supposed to say no, but I said yes. Well, he said, I might as well now, he said, to be telling my story to a jackass, and the jackass to be jumping around as telling you the story. You know, I had a great kick out of that. That's what I meant for that, you know. That
You were caught out that day then.
I was caught, you know. That was Matt Curran, you know. He was, you know, he was a great storyteller, but he was talking so fast, I couldn't make a distinction, you know, on my judgment. What side should I take? But I took the wrong side, and that's what he called me, that he might as well tell the story to an ass tell me the story.
Do you remember many Shanakees in that part of Spittle? Did you ever meet any Shanakees over there? Any storytellers?
Oh, no, well, there was but I would say, you know, that there was well, you know, I wouldn't call it storytellers. You know, some of them was very witty, and one of them was this Martin Carter, you know. They said, you know, this Martin Carter, he had a little farm there, and he never got married probably until he was, you know, he was about 50 years maybe, perhaps more. But as it happened in them days, there was a lot of matchmaking. His uncles probably made out the wife for him, and he didn't know anything about her background or anything. She was some miles away. But my nephew was the one that Steve there was telling me about her, that she was a little bit, he called it off with a rocket, you know. She was a little, probably mentally unbalanced. And so whenever Martin would go to the pub, you know, for a couple of pints every night, he liked his pint, she'd run back to the priest, to Father Donnelly, you know, complaining about him. And so finally, Father Donnelly made a visit on Martin one time, and he found him sitting by the old fireside, and the dog was stretched by the fireside, and the cat was leaning in on the dog. You know, this was the turf fire. They have stoves now, of course, but those days they had the turf fires. And Father Donnelly was giving Martin a bawling out for being so unconsidered towards his wife, and he was trying to explain to him his obligation of his matrimonial, that they were, you know, married and two and one, and that he should be more loyal to his wife and not to cause so much trouble. And during his sermon, he looked down at the dog and the cat leaning on the fire, and he said, "Why don't you get along," he said, "like that, cat and dog? Look at the way they love each other." And Martin said, "Father," he said, "you tie the two of them together and you'll find out they won't get along either." Yeah.
Steve, you were about 20 years old then when you left Ireland. 20
I was
or 21?
20 and 4 months, I guess.
20 and 4 months.
I was 20 years old from the previous Christmas, you know, 1920, and I came here in April 1921.
What was going on in Ireland at the time that you left?
Well, the Black and Tans was there at the time, of course, and, you know, it was very unsettled, you know. I mean, that was during the revolutionary time, and of course the prices of cattle and everything like that was very low, you know. I would say, you know, as far as the economy was concerned, it's very poor, I would call it, you know, wages. Those who had jobs in the city of Galway, let's say, they were just barely probably getting by, you know. I mean, wages was poor. So
had you heard any stories out in Connemara about what had gone on in Dublin in Easter 1916?
And no, dear, you know, the only thing I knew about is about the uprising of 1916, you know, of course.
What had you heard about that, Steve?
That was, you know, that De Valera was in on the, you know, the 16, you know, and the execution, because there was 16 of them executed, but because out in the country where I came from, even the Connaught Tribune, you saw that paper in Galway, it was never a political paper. For example, it's mostly all for local news. And in them days, of course, it was, the front page was only property for sale, let's say, even though they used to say auction, so many auctions on property. Well, that was the front page, and very little news that you would get on the political side, especially international news. So we were kept pretty well ignorant. We depended on somebody to tell us, what took place in Dublin at the time there. But after that, they organized all over Ireland, For example, they joined all of them. We were all joined up, not to resist the draft, because myself and my three brothers, four of us, I was the youngest, I was about 16 that time when I got the draft papers, when they passed in Downing Street in England, they passed the draft, to go in the First World War. And
they call it conscription.
Conscription, yes, right. And you'd only get 3 months training that time. But that's the time that they started the revolution. That's prevented it, So I probably, maybe if it wasn't for the uprising in Dublin, I might have been killed over in France. I think it saved thousands of the Irish fellas, because how little they knew, about coming drafted from the farms, and they gave them three months training, and they were out at the front there,
What do you remember about the anti-conscription movement?
Well, they all voted that. They all were voted, and I voted. For example, they voted against it. They went overwhelmingly against the conscription.
Was it the church and other political parties as well?
No, dear. The church didn't have anything to do with it. It was De Valera and the leaders of the revolution that got organized. For example, in my area, the school teacher, Michael Thornton, who was teaching us, he was in charge of all the West there. He was the one that got us organized and used to go drilling, and I used to remember, be drilling on a Sunday, and the policemen, would be watching us there, of course, I mean, there's the leaders, whatever leaders they had, they got arrested. That time, let's say, if a 10 was killed, well, they would kill 10 of the others against the 110, That's
so the British would execute 10 Irish?
Yes. And I remember in one place where this Michael Hood, he was a young fella, but they say he was not in the ambush, but it was some woman that had a grudge against him that squealed on him, they said. But he got killed, and it was because there was 3 officers killed in an ambush near Hertford there, That was in 1920, I think it happened,
During the Tan War?
Yeah, during the Tan War.
Did you ever hear of Michael Brannock in Galway?
Oh, Neil Brannock, he was an Irish, he was the Irish promoter of the Irish language. He was dead by that time,
Yes.
Irish Brannock, yes.
What about Liam Mellows?
No, I didn't know about him, dear. I didn't. Probably I heard, but I couldn't tell you any detail about his life. No.
What was the name of the political party that De Valera was leading at that time?
Oh, Sinn Féin. They used to call them Sinn Féin. Sinn Féin means ourselves. Sinn Féin. It's an Irish way of saying ourselves. Sinn Féin means ourselves. Well, that was the party of De Valera, but many people really blamed De Valera for the uprising that started there, because he was not allowed on the treaty. When they signed the treaty in 1922 with Michael Collins, De Valera was not allowed on that treaty because he was not American. He was not considered an Irish citizen. He was born in Brooklyn, New York. His mother was Irish, but his father was a Spaniard, De Valera.
Right.
And so
that saved his life eventually, didn't it?
That's what saved his life. But I say, and I have that same feeling myself. I think De Valera was the cause of a lot of them. They start, after the treaty was signed, they start kind of a revolution between themselves, between his party and the Free State, those who accepted the treaty, you know. And De Valera was used, for example, the 6 counties in the north, and he used that as a kind of an excuse, saying that it wasn't, that it was a betrayal on the part of Collins to get that treaty signed, to sign a treaty without getting the 6 counties.
Nice.
Well, he finally got to be a premier himself. For 17 years he was a prime minister himself, and like any politician, he was promising if he was elected, he could get the 6 counties in with the south of Ireland without firing a shot. Well, he never did it. He was in there. On the other hand, for example, what did Lever did when he was elected a premier, I know, was in the, back in 1935, around that area, you know, 36
32.
or so, maybe around that period. But for example, the first thing he did, he refused to recognize the English, what I call him, not an ambassador, but there's the same as in Canada out here. There is a represent from the Queen, from the British government, in Ontario. You
The
know,
Lord Lieutenant.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, now De Valera at that time, he was getting £3,000 to, you know, as a representative from the British government to see that nothing would be done contrary to the treaty, like, you know. So I couldn't describe that, Michael, you know.
So it was a difficult time then when you left Ireland.
It was.
And just about to enter into the Civil War.
Oh yes, the Civil War was going on from 1918, in fact, you know. Previous to that, the Tans came to Ireland, I think, in the latter part of 1918. I used to see them, you know, big lorries, you know, with their guns blazing, you know. And it was, you know, at that time, you know, many, a lot of people got killed. And of course, I mean, I wouldn't say that many of those constabulary policemen, you know, for example, the constabulary policeman was practically all Irish themselves, working for the British.
Right.
A lot of them got killed too, you know, some of them got killed too.
Steve, what do you, why did you leave Ireland at that time?
I you know, is for the same reason I think that they're leaving Ireland today, is for the economy. You know, I mean, if you want to make a living, you'd have to leave Ireland. And of course, the custom in Ireland for, I mean, centuries, I mean, or the last couple of 100 years, I will say, you were brought up on a farm, and that farmer, the farm that you were brought on, it was left to only one individual in the family. Supposing if there was 5 or 6 boys in the family, or they'd all have to go. There was only, the farm was given to one of them, and that was the oldest boy, if he wanted it. The oldest boy had the right to the farm if he wanted it, see. In some cases they didn't care, they didn't want it. But I say the rest of the family would either have to go to Canada, Australia, or to America. And I wanted to go. I was over in East Galway, and this fella by the name of Michael Murk, he was working in England, and he asked me if he wanted to go with him. It was £3.10 a week that time. Well, to me, of course, it sounded big, and I was going to England with him only for this woman, a friend, you know, that I worked with, Mrs. Flanagan was her name. She told me, Steve, she said, if you have any relations in America, she said, it would be better off for you to go to America, because if you go to England, you're liable to fall into bad company. You have no relations over there. So I took her advice, and I wrote to my uncle in Portland here, and he sent me my passage, you know.
What was his name, Steve?
Marcus. We used to call him Marcus Concannon. Mark Concannon. He was my father's brother. He lived in Nightville, and he sent me $125. That time, the passage was $100 on the boat, and then the other $25 you'd get it. They call it landing money. After we get to New York, we got the $25, you know, so that $25 would take you whatever destination you were supposed to go. I was going to Portland. You know.
Were you called Marcus's Greenhorn for a while?
They used to call me Marcus's Greenhorn, yes, because I mean they'd always call us Greenhorns when we first came from Ireland here, you know, and so I was called by some of the Irish, you know, down as I used to work on the boats, they'd call me Marcus's Greenhorn, you know.
Steve, do you remember the night before you left Ireland?
Yeah.
What was it like?
No, really.
Did they have any kind of a going away ceremony?
Oh
for
yeah,
you?
we had a party. You know, lots of time they used to call it the Irish wake, or the American wake rather. You know what I mean? They figured that in many cases, of course, many of them left like that, and they never went home. You know, they never went home. So
unlike yourself.
But I went home. Yes, indeed, I went home. I made 8 trips over back, but.
So what happened that night then?
But we, you know, we had a party, you know, singing and dancing, and we left early in the morning. Of course, my mother and went to Galway with me, and we went on a train there. So there, I say in them days we used to have the old steam train, you know, that took us to Dublin. We had to go to Dublin, and the Irish Council there, and myself and another fella. Martin Flaherty was his name. He died many years ago. He was John Flaherty. He has a son, a lawyer here now. But we went to Dublin. We went to the American Council, and they'd ask you that time. You would, if for example, if they'd ask you, are you going to America to work, and you say yes, that you would have a job there. That you wouldn't pass. Because that was forbidden. That was a clause, I think, in the immigration there at that time, that if you say you came to this country for a job, that you had a job, but you would have to say that you were coming here on a visit. So that's what I had to say too, that I was going to visit my uncle here. So.
And where did you go from Dublin then?
From Dublin we went out to, we had to go, they call it that time, several miles outside of Dublin, near Dalkey there, and we got a boat there.
Kingstown, was it?
Kingstown, that's right, Kingstown.
Dunleera?
And from, yes, that's what I call it now, Kingstown in them days. And from there we went to Holyhead, and from Holyhead we went on a train to Liverpool. And it was probably 2 o'clock in the morning, or maybe so, before we got to. Mrs. Christie was her name. You know, she used to have all these Irish immigrants that was immigrating to America. And we waited there, and we got a boat this morning at Liverpool, which was, the name of the boat was Celtics. So we had a great time on the boat. It took us 9 days, I guess, 9 days, but there was, it would, that time from London to New York, it would take only 8 days. But our ship went to release some of their Canadians up in Halifax, and that delayed it an extra day, you know.
So you sailed aboard the Celtic from Liverpool to Halifax.
From Liverpool to Halifax, but I mean, we didn't go to Halifax, only those that was
just
going
to
there.
drop off.
But we were by right, we were supposed to go direct to New York, but on account of the other passengers that was going to Canada, they had to go to Canada, to Halifax. But both the Cunard line and the passengers, Cunard line and the Five Star line, which was the two main line that was going that time, it would only take 8 days. Mm-hmm. It took 8 days, you know.
Was the Celtic a Cunard line, or was it a White Star line?
A White Star line, yeah.
Now, what was the atmosphere like on the boat?
There was party. It was, you know, boys and girls. We had a great old time dancing, and I was away from home for 1.5 years anyway, so some of them maybe was homesick, but I wasn't, you know, I mean.
You had already gotten over your homesick?
I got over it, I was used to it, and I was glad to be coming to this country. We had a great old time, you know, I mean, dancing there, you know.
Was there some music on the boat?
Oh yeah, there were there, you know, dancing and singing, so we had a great old time. I remember, you know, a woman Scotch from Scotland, she came over, I guess she heard us talking Gaelic, and she started asking us other Gaelic. Well, there is the Gaelic, the Scotch Gaelic too, but there are many of their words I could understand. For example, the same words as as ours, and like I think, let's say, Derris is the door, and Kittle, you know, and Turon, but there is other, in a sentence, for example, she'd have other words that would throw us off, you know, so we couldn't communicate to each other, you know. Was the Irish Gaelic, in other words, I'm saying, the Gaelic language and the Scotch Gaelic is very much similar.
Had you ever heard Scotch Gaelic spoken before that day?
No.
That was your first experience with it?
That's my first experience, you know.
What happened then after you left Halifax?
Oh no, we did. You know, we just happened to.
You dropped off some people there.
Dropped off some people, and the ship went straight to New York City. That's where then we had to go to Ellis Island there, and of course, I mean, you'd have to go to Ellis Island to be examined there. And some of them, I don't know, failed in, you know, because we had, as far as I know, other people on the boat besides us, Irish. You know, there was maybe probably the vicinity of maybe 200, maybe more immigrants altogether on the boat.
What were the conditions like on the boat, if you remember?
It was nice, very nice. And you know, as I remember, we were on the second sitting, I don't know, first bell and second bells. We were on the second bell, you know,
for eating meals?
For eating meals. But it's possible, maybe I will say, you know, we were in second class, like, that those who were in first class would have the, you know, maybe that was the first bell. I do not know, you know.
Oh, yes.
But they were nice, you know, and all I say is the crew and everything was very courteous and very nice. I enjoyed it, you know.
What do you remember about Ellis Island?
Well, you know, not too bad. I was glad. It was, I was glad to be on when we got out of there. You know, I say, you know, it's so long, Michael, you know, this over 60, going on 70 years now. That, you know, but I know it was a strict place for they examine them, you know what I mean, for diseases or anything like that, you know. Yes. That's anybody, which was very good, you know, the doctors, you know.
Now, after you went through that examination process and you were let out, what were your feelings as you came out into the harbor, into the port of New York for the first time?
Well, yes, in fact, you know, the impression, because since I was brought up in the country place, and at night time it's all dark. Even I went through Falmouth the other night there, and even when you go out in the country place, here it's dark at night time because where there's no electricity. But I was used to the dark at night time. But one of the great impressions I had when we got in the harbor, New York, is the glare of miles of beautiful lights along Ellis Island and all the islands out in the harbor there in New York. That was beautiful, and I remember a big sign that used to flash off on. It was, I found out afterwards, you know, Lipton's tea and coffee. Well, we used to have the Lipton's tea over there because in my time, the Irish was very poor for coffee, you know. They do have it today because of tourism, but we were brought up with the tea, you know. But that made me feel at home when I saw the Lipton's tea there and the coffee. But finally, afterwards, I found that the sign was really in Hoboken, New Jersey, where my uncle used to live. When I visited my uncle, that's where a big sign was up there, used to flash on.
How long did you stay in New York before you headed up to Portland?
We only stayed there probably, I went that very day when we got off of Ellis Island. They put us on a ferry, and it's on a boat from there we went, you know, to Boston. We came to Boston on a ferry, on a kind of a ferry. I didn't like that part of it, you know, but, and then from when we got off in Boston, I think in South Boston, myself and my friend was put in a small little coach, you know, with a horse buggy, drove us to North Station. So they put us in on a train on the North Station in Boston, and my uncle met me back at the old Union Station here, you know.
So that's how you arrived into Portland, was the Union Station?
Yeah.
What was it like to arrive in Portland and have your uncle there?
Yeah, I was glad, you know. I mean, I noticed, for example, my uncle did not look like my father, you know. My uncle was very witty and very taller than my father, but I was happy, and certainly I would say at that time I had to, you'd be, you know, a new climate, new systems, government. For a time I was suffering from inferiority complex, I would call it. You know, I mean.
What caused that, Steve?
Well, you know, I mean, I knew I had quite a lot to learn, you know, I mean, from the new ways of the way they were evident in this country from my own home, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, for like calling, my uncle had two daughters too. One of them was working the telephone company. One of them was about my age, and the other one was she married. Mother was about 2 years old or so. I was, you know, I was bashful that one. I would say, you know, you would come from the farm. You'd
Sure.
be. So I got over it after a short time, you know. Then I met a lot of the boys that came at the same time. So, and we used to work for you know, work together, you know. I used to work, first job I went to work is for Romano, for Joan and Romano. Well, for Joan and Romano them days, they're the one that built that South Portland High School in 1923, you know. It's a junior high now, but it was a
Yes.
beautiful school that time. And I think he did not build, to my knowledge, he didn't build the Deering High School, but the Deering High School was built in 1923 too, the same year.
Did you work on the South Portland High School?
I did.
It's
yeah.
the one called Mahoney now, I think.
Yeah, that's true. But for Joan, who came from Italy, you know, excuse me, Romano, I should say. For Joan, there were two partners, but for Joan was the boss, and he couldn't speak hardly in English, and he couldn't even spell. So, them days, of course, you'd get paid on Friday, cash, you know, an envelope, an envelope. There was no danger of anybody robbing you. And he used to call me, when I told him Concannon, he couldn't, I guess, pronounce Concannon, he called me mechanic. So when he used to call out on Friday mechanic, well, I knew it was my way, my envelope. And so we worked with him a while. So one day we were getting 50 cents an hour, and somebody said, you know, that we should ask for 60 cents an hour. This was Michael Beatty, he was working with we asked him that we should ask for 60 cents. So we went over to Romano, and he told Romano, the boys, he said, Mr. Romano, he said, wants 60 cents an hour. Well, it took him a long time before he knew what Mike was asking him. At last he thought Mike was asking for his wages, you know, to get through. So he paid him off, and Mike came back to us and he said, you, damn it, heck, he said, with you, he said, I wasn't fighting for you, and all I got out was I got fired myself. So we quit on account of Mike Beatty. We 9 of us, and poor Romano said he wouldn't hire any of us back anymore, but he had double vision glasses. Some of them went back again, but he never recognized. He never did know the difference.
Steve, tell me the story again about the fellow Michael.
That was in I think that was happened in 1923 over. The State Pier was built around that period. That was the time for the bankruptcy took place in Germany. They used to have 3 big boatloads from Germany came that time, you know, and we'd throw them probably a dime or a nickel, and they'd throw you down so many thousand marks, you know. But they went to, I think those Germans went to Ontario up in Canada. But we had most of the work on that time, you know, we were putting in curbstones, setting up curbstones, but most of them was Italians, and we had this Michael with us, and very good-natured, you know, but myself and the other Irish fellow was with me. We used to make him try to tell us about Italy and about the Irish, and he was we used to get a great fun out of him, you know what I mean, the way he was describing his children, you know, he said he had 6 of the babe, you know, and he started way down, and he kept on until he went higher than himself, because his son used to work with us, you know. And, but we we used to make him talk, and one day, you know, we used to work at 7 in the morning, and one day Mike came around 8:30, I guess, and the boss asked him, you know, what happened, that he wasn't, and Mike was kind of mad, and he said to me, get up in the morning, he said, me gas in the head, me sick of the stomach, you know, I guess he meant he had a headache, and me sick of the stomach, and that 2 Irish and best, he called us 2 Irish bastards, that he were the cause of all his trouble the day before, because we made him talk so much, you know. So the boss took him and put him down on State Street. The company was building another place down there, and the following Saturday we had to work all day, and so I saw poor Michael when all dressed up in a nice blue suit. I said, Michael, what happened, you know? I said, I went up in a Congress Street, you know, and he couldn't think of Tay Street. He couldn't think of State Street. You know, he said, where a bigger the man, he said, sitting down the share no stir at all. He meant Longfellow, you know, the statue, you know, that he meant that no stir at all. It was stationary, you know, like. And from
so
that on.
Yeah, that was his way of saying Longfellow's statue.
Yeah, from that on, well, sometimes we'd make a date with each other and they said, I'll meet you where bigger the man is sitting down the share no stir at all, you know. Yeah.
It sounds like you had a good time when you arrived here in
we
Portland.
were, you know, we were happy and we worked, you know. I never really, thank God, I never got sick early. I mean, the climate always agreed with me here. I liked it, you know.
Did you ever think of going back to Ireland, or were you always content to stay here in Portland?
Yeah, I mean, for a visit, yes, I want to go back for a visit, but as far as living over there now, no, I wouldn't, you know. I mean, I'm so used to this place now, I'd prefer it to Ireland, you know.
What was it like back when you arrived? Did you feel at home here after a short while?
I did. I always liked this guy. I always liked Portland. I went to Boston a while. I worked there a short little time, you know, back, you know, in the mills of, back in Shally Burrs, they used to call them, Shally Burrs paper mills in East Walpole. I worked there in the fall of, I think, in 1923 there, you know, or the early part probably of 1923, but maybe it was the winter of 1923, I should say. And I know, I know I didn't care about now, but I mean, there was a lot of Irish there and a lot of Polish, you know, but I came back to Portland, and I always liked Portland, you know.
Why do you think so many Irish came to Portland and Norwood?
Well, one of the reasons for that, Michael, is, for example, if you went to Australia now and you don't know a single person in Australia, naturally you would write to your cousin if you had a cousin there, and so you'll end up wherever your relation is.
Mm-hmm.
That's the reason. I think that's applicable not only to the Irish here. For example, here they're mostly all from Galway here in Portland, but the Italians do. If you look into them, they came to visit some of their friends too, some relations.
Yeah.
It's relations, you know, because you go into a strange country and you don't know nothing about the custom, not about the country, and naturally you'll have to the first base is to go to a person that is related to you or that is interested in your welfare. And that's the reason I think I came to Poland, because my two uncles was here, you know.
What did you do for work in addition to construction in the early years when you arrived here?
In the summertime, you know, we used to work for the water company, and I worked for the gas company. But in the wintertime, you know, mostly we used to work longshore. That was, of course, when the longshore was booming here for a couple of years at least. 1922, 23, it was very busy down at the you know, down at the Grand Trunk there. There used to be, in 1922 especially, I would say there was sometimes 16 ships, merchant ships in there, you know, at times. And of course, most of the goods that they were shipping over to England was coming from Canada, and the line of grain, beef, and cheese, and mostly all Canadian stuff that was shipped over from here.
What was it like to be a longshoreman at that time?
Really, I enjoyed it, because to be a longshoreman, for example, you have to be rugged enough and healthy enough to do little lifting, once you are on the job, you are always free to talk, the boss didn't mean anything to you as long as you did your work there. Let's say you were working, in the old days, they work on a clay boat, and there was 4 big tubs. And each tub had, there was 8 men in the hole, down the hole, and each tub had 2 men. Well, now, as long as you had your tub of clay filled, if you did that, then you were free to talk, because the sling came along, and picked up this one that, and came to you. So as long as the boss, that was one of the privileges alongshore, is that they could talk and kid and
Did you talk in Irish or in English to your friends?
In Irish, mostly all in Irish all the time, because all the people you did work with, practically all spoke Gaelic, At that time, they were from Connemara, from Cashar, as they call it. But
what other regions of Ireland were people from here in Portland?
Well, I would say, that mostly very few of them came from any part that I know of, with the exception of, there was very few, for example, that came from Roscommon, and it was mostly, let's say, even if they were maybe like girls now, who did domestic work for Yankees back in the Western Prom. Like Mary O'Shea now, she used to, you don't remember, she used to work for Flaherty, the undertaker there. She came from Roscommon. But most of the girls and boys that came, they all came from Galway here and settled down here,
You told me a story one time, Steve, about John Brown, the Irish policeman.
Yeah, I didn't know. Well, I was working for the American Oil, for the Texas Oil Company rather, back in 1930. But there was, there was a lot of Irish American. They were witty and but they used to be kidding about the Irish, But I do not know, if that ever happened, But they said that John Brown, who came from Spittle, he was a big policeman. I remember him in 1921 when I came here. He was a big, husky, very powerful, strong man. And that one July, this Jew was going along. He was selling bananas, I think, and he had a horse coming along, Cumberland Avenue near Oak Street. And it was a very hot day, so the horse got sunstruck and fell down dead. And Brown had to come because he was on that beat, and he came to report the accident. And he asked one of them, "How do you spell Cumberland Avenue?" And the crowd of them said they didn't know. Well, all right, he said, let 3 or 4 of you get a hold of her and pull her over to Wall Street.
Steve, you've been here in Portland now many years. Is there anything you would have done different if you had the chance?
Well, honestly, Michael, I don't regret, for example, let's say, if I had the education I know, that would be quite different. It would be a different life. But the way I went through it, I was perfect. I would say I was always on the poverty level, I call that, But we never was in want either, I would call it like that. I wouldn't say that, I wouldn't call that we lived a life of luxury, but I wouldn't want to change it, really. I enjoyed it. The secret of life is your happiness.